Chapter 66. Gu Xingyin went through the memories in his mind, and finally remembered who the magician in red was. Joanna Raymond, the granddaughter of the finance minister. Everyone in the Carter Empire knew that the Duke of White Rose and the finance minister were not on good terms. They always had different opinions when discussing national affairs, and neither could do anything to the other. Because of this, the younger generation of the two families did not like each other. There was another reason why Joanna did not like Veronica. People always compared the two of them. If it was just a simple comparison, the problem was that although she didn't want to admit it, Veronica Roman was indeed more outstanding than her, Joanna Raymond. They were of the same age, and Joanna was already a beginner magician. According to the level of magic, they started from the lowest apprentice, then went on to the sorcerer, sorcerer, grand sorcerer, and grand sorcerer. Joanna was undoubtedly a genius to be able to cultivate to the level of a magician at the age of 13. However, Veronica was also 13 years old, but she was already a great swordsman. Similarly, warriors were divided into swordsman, great swordsman, legendary swordsman, and warrior saint. In terms of level, a great swordsman was equivalent to a grand sorcerer, which was 2 levels higher than Joanna. Over time, Joanna would subconsciously avoid Veronica. It was common knowledge that Joanna of the Raymond family was nowhere to be seen in the presence of Princess Veronica of the Roman family. As Veronica's good friend, Lilith naturally had to speak up for her friend at this time. At this time, the boss came out with a bag of fresh slimline grass. "I'm really sorry, miss. The slimline grass has been reserved by Her Highness in advance," the boss said to Joanna, very embarrassed. Joanna looked at Gu Xingyin. "How much did you pay?" "I'll pay double. Give me the slimline grass." Gu Xingyin's answer was to pay the boss the crystal coins and put the slimline grass in the space ring. Joanna was exasperated. What she hated the most was the arrogant face of the Roman family. It was as if she was just a clown in their eyes. Gu Xingyin thought to herself, "I'm not going to take the blame for this. With my facial paralysis persona, I can't give you a smile." "Stop right there, Veronica Roman." Joanna's fireball flew past Gu Xingyin's clothes. If Gu Xingyin hadn't dodged it, her robe would have been ruined. Gu Xingyin turned around with a hint of anger in her eyes. Joanna was a little guilty. She just wanted to warn Veronica, but she didn't expect that she was too emotional and lost her aim. However, she could not show her fear in front of the Roman family. She raised her chin and said, "I told you to stop. I want the slender grass in your hands." If not for the fact that the slender grass was so hard to find, she would not have bothered Veronica Roman. At this time Vera, who was in Gu Xingyin's arms, poked her head out and called out softly. Joanna's expression changed. "Is that a Siamese cat in your arms?" Gu Xingyin did not say anything. Joanna's face was pale. "I've asked him for it so many times, but he refused to give it to me. It turns out that he gave it to you." Gu Xingyin immediately understood why Joanna wanted the slimline grass. She suddenly felt that Joanna was a little pitiful. It was just a story of how the falling flower fell in love with the heartless brook. But sympathy was one thing. She would never give up Vera's rations. Chapter 67. Joanna seemed to have lost her soul. She glanced at Gu Xingyin, stomped her feet, and left. Gu Xingyin asked the shopkeeper to send the things to the Duke's mansion, and walked on the street with Lilith. Lilith came over and gossiped. Joanna likes the second prince. She knows that the second prince asked the queen for a Siamese cat. She must want to get some slender grass to please the prince. She was gloating. She must not have thought that the prince had already given it to you. At this point Lilith mysteriously said to Gu Xingyin, "Nika, do you think His Highness likes you?" She looked at Gu Xingyin seriously, touched her chin and said, "Nika, you are so beautiful. If I were a gentleman, I would marry you." Gu Xingyin replied to her with an expressionless face. Okay, I'm kidding." Lilith saw that Gu Xingyin ignored her, and trotted over from behind. "Let me tell you something," she said mysteriously. "Have you been to the underground coliseum in the south of the city?" "Underground coliseum?" Gu Xingyin's eyes lit up. Lilith saw that she was interested, and said proudly, "Brother Kyle got a few invitations." You know it's hard to get tickets without connections. How about the 2nd of next month? Do you want to go with us? Gu Xingyin was of course willing. The underground Colosseum was one of the darkest places in the king's city of Carter. It was open to the public once a month, and they would put carefully selected slaves and hand-raised magical beasts to duel, providing entertainment for the nobles. The top nobles of the empire would not like such a place, but they would not forbid their children from going there to broaden their horizons. Every warrior would yearn for a battle of blood and strengthen their bones. Gu Xingyin was no exception. What's more, for the noble ladies who lived in comfortable castles, it was their nature to pursue excitement. Seeing Gu Xingyin nod, Lilith was very excited. Then it's a deal. It's a day off at the academy. We'll pick you up in the morning. Eve Heiss felt very tired. The man in the necklace seemed to be in a hurry. She spent almost all her time on the road except for eating and resting. Finally, she arrived at the king's city yesterday, but she was teased and teased by a group of noble youths. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore, and used the magic taught by the man in the necklace to hit one of them. She didn't expect to cause such a mess. That noble's son died on the spot. She had also been chased for an entire day and night, and only now did she have a moment to catch her breath. She leaned against the wall, leaning against the wall. And the man, she leaned against the wall. The man in the necklace said, "You've already shaken them off." Eve Heather was relieved. She still had a lot of faith in the ability of this mysterious sir. As soon as she relaxed, the fatigue in her body overwhelmed her, and she felt a little drowsy. "Someone's coming," a low voice said. Eve Heiss opened her eyes almost instantly. The alertness in her bones allowed her to react in an instant. "It's not the group that chased you." Eve curled up her body and hid in the corner. She looked no different from a beggar on the street. She hoped that these people would not notice her. But things didn't always go as planned. Chapter 68. Damn it! That little slave ran away. If we can't get him back today, we'll probably be slaughtered when we go back. A big man cursed. They were all guards of the underground Colosseum. During this time, they were preparing for the duel at the end of next month. Who would have thought that today, a little slave, who was used as a sacrifice, would break through layers of obstacles and run out? They were responsible for guarding. If they were found to have lost someone, the consequences would not be good. "Hey, look." One of them found Eve huddled in the corner. Another one instantly understood what he meant. Anyway, they were all slaves used as cannon fodder. As long as the number was right, no one would pay attention to what a slave looked like. "What are you doing? Let me go." Eve Taylor had never expected that this group of people would target her. "Boy, don't be nervous. We'll take you to a good place. I promise you'll eat and drink well." She would be obedient for a few days, so that she could be the food for the treasure of the Colosseum. "Don't resist. Follow them." The mysterious man's voice suddenly came into Eve's ears. The mysterious man had his own considerations. He had lost a lot of strength. With Eve's skills, there was no way to escape from these people. It was better to follow them first. He could take advantage of this time to recover his strength. When the time came, he would have more confidence to take her away. Eve obediently quieted down. Those big men thought that their words had convinced the little beggar, and they exchanged a smile with each other. Soon it was the second day. On this day, Gu Xingyin got up early to do morning exercises as usual, and then had breakfast with her parents. Soon after the meal, the housekeeper came and said that the carriage of the Bill family was parked outside the Duke's mansion. "Good day, Your Excellency the Duke." "Good day, beautiful Duchess." Lilith gave a standard salute to the Duke couple. Mrs. Roman's beautiful face was full of smiles. She liked such a warm little girl like Lilith. Sometimes, when she thought of her daughter and her husband's cold little face, she always felt sad. "Good day, Lilith. Did you come to see our Nika?" she asked in a gentle tone. Lilith looked a little reserved. "Yes, madam. We agreed to go out together today." "All right then, Nika. Are you ready?" "Don't keep your friend waiting too long," said the Duchess. "Mom, I'm ready," Gu Xingyin replied. They said goodbye to the Duke and his wife, and got into the carriage. When Gu Xingyin and Lilith could no longer be seen, the Duchess complained to her husband, "Look, it's all because of your cold face. Look at how scared the little girl is. What a sprightly girl she is, poor Lilith. The Duke looked at his wife helplessly. Nana, you know I didn't do it on purpose. The Duchess winked mischievously. Then the great Duke of White rose. Why don't you smile? Duke. Lilith pulled Gu Xingyin into the carriage. You scared me to death. Lilith patted her chest exaggeratedly. Every time I see the Duke, I'm more scared than when I see the supervising elder. The supervising elder was the strictest old man in the Carter Royal Academy. He was in charge of student discipline in the academy. He always wore a meticulous black robe, and his wrinkled face always had a mocking expression. He was the last person the students wanted to see. Chapter 69. Gu Xingyin silently lit a candle for his father. He's such a handsome and charming duke, yet he's being compared to the supervising elder. She looked at Lilith seriously. Don't talk about father like that. He is very good to people. Lilith silently imagined the interaction between Veronica and the Duke. The two expressionless people looked at each other and communicated with their eyes. She felt a little cold just thinking about it. Looking at her best friend's expressionless face, which had begun to show the trademark of the Duchess of White Rose, Lilith felt that she had a heavy responsibility. She wanted to change her best friend's personality, which happened to be the same as the Duchess. The carriage stopped at a place, and Lilith and Gu Xingyin got off the carriage. They saw two young men waiting on the side of the road on horses. One of them was Lilith's brother, Kyle Bill, and the other was his friend. Brother Kyle. Joey. Lilith ran over and greeted the two. This is my good friend, Veronica Roman of the Roman family. Both of them looked at Gu Xingyin in surprise. They had heard of the Pearl of the Empire, but this was the first time they saw Gu Xingyin in person. Good day, Princess Roman. The two of them bowed to Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin nodded and said, We are all friends here to play. There is no need to pay attention to these formalities. The sun shone on Gu Xingyin's face, making the girl's face even more dazzling. Along the way, Joey and Bill were extra attentive to Gu Xingyin. In their teens, the most straightforward way for these young men to recognize a girl was her appearance. We're here. The four of them didn't wear clothes embroidered with their family emblems. Gu Xingyin even wore a cloak. The green eyes of the Roman family were too unique and had to be covered. Bill handed the invitation letter in his hand to the gatekeeper and entered the Colosseum without any problems. Everything here seemed to be out of place in the king's city. Lilith and the others were amazed. The royal city in their eyes was filled with riches, prosperity, and a life of luxury. But here, the surrounding environment gave off a gloomy and damp feeling, and the people coming and going all had gloomy expressions. However, all of this made them even more excited. It was as if they were going on an exciting adventure in an unfamiliar place. Gu Xingyin, on the other hand, had a bad premonition. Her intuition had always been accurate. In the previous world, when Cheng Yiru was taking revenge on the Cheng family, she had the same feeling. Soon, this premonition was confirmed. The system suddenly said, The underground Colosseum has found the existence of a plot character, Eve Heather. Gu Xingyin was surprised. Isn't it supposed to be 2 years before she comes to the capital? The system said. Maybe the host's arrival changed the plot. Gu Xingyin suddenly remembered the cause of Veronica's death in the original plot. She suddenly said, Is it too late for me to leave now? She didn't want to face the Demon King, who had lived for 10,000 years. Lilith and the others were puzzled by Gu Xingyin's sudden desire to leave, but seeing her insistence, they could only let her be. The gatekeeper of the Colosseum regretfully said that before the battle ended, all guests were not allowed to leave. Gu Xingyin's heart went cold. She couldn't force it. The only thing she could do now was to pray that the Demon King would not discover her existence. Chapter 70. The Demon King only felt that his heart was beating very fast, if he still had that thing. The feeling that had been with him since he woke up had become unprecedentedly strong after coming to the king's city, and today, it had reached its peak. He felt that his entire soul was trembling. He could feel that the thing he had been longing for was already in front of him. He was going to find her. Eve only felt that the necklace's heat was a bit scorching. Is that person all right? She thought uneasily. After all, in this strange place, That mysterious stranger was her only guarantee. Quick, quick, quick. You all move faster. The battle is about to start. Lord Barton has already finished warming up. It's time to put these little guys up. Eve had indeed been well taken care of by the people in the underground Colosseum these past few days, but she also understood where this place was. Don't worry, I will help you when the time comes. When it's chaotic, you can take the opportunity to quietly escape. The Demon King comforted her. Soon, Eve and more than 10 youths of similar age were driven into a huge iron cage. At first, these youths were a little confused, but when they saw the huge iron cage, the bloodstains on the ground, and the excited spectators on the stands outside, a few of them suddenly understood where they were, and their expressions immediately became desperate. They wanted to escape, but the cage was already locked. This cage was made of special steel, and with just the few of them, it was impossible to break it. Roar! A huge roar came, and 4 big men appeared on the left side of the Colosseum. They were carrying a cage on their shoulders, and inside the cage was a huge tiger-type magical beast. Let us welcome the king of the King's City Underground Colosseum, the 6th-ranked magical beast, Thunderwing Tiger. The host said loudly with an excited expression. The atmosphere of the scene was pushed to a climax. Many nobles waved the things in their hands, and their expressions were faintly crazy. In the iron cage, Eve's face suddenly became pale. At this time, even the slowest person understood their fate. At the same time, a person came out from the right side of the Colosseum. This man only had a simple cloth around his waist, and his whole body was muscular. He waved his hand at the audience. The audience screamed again. Let us welcome the hero of the underground Colosseum, Barton the Violent Lion. Barton! Barton! Gu Xingyin was a little surprised. Most of the people sitting here were nobles. She really did not expect that those nobles, who were usually well-dressed and well-mannered, would have such a crazy side. She took a closer look at Barton. He was a great swordsman just like her. Gu Xingyin was a little surprised. With the cultivation of a great swordsman, he could find a decent and good job anywhere. Why would anyone want to come to a place where life and death were a constant threat? While Gu Xingyin was thinking, the huge thunder-winged lion had already been placed into the iron cage. Ah! Screams rang out, and the children all ran towards the furthest corner of the thunder-winged lion. However, this was of no use. The entire cage was only so big. A bloodthirsty look flashed across the thunder-winged lion's eyes. In a flash, it arrived in front of the nearest youth. Then it opened its mouth, revealing its sharp teeth. Chapter 71. Eve Heiss was stunned. She could clearly feel the warm blood splattering on her face. She had never felt as close to death as she did now. What are you waiting for? The mysterious man's cold voice sounded in her mind. She came back to her senses, and forced herself not to look at the broken body on the ground. She gritted her teeth and ran to the side. Gu Xingyin was stunned. She thought that the Colosseum was only a battle between magical beasts and warriors. She didn't expect that there would be such a one-sided massacre. The dozen or so youths in the cage had no room to fight back against the Thunderwing beast. It was insane. The people around seemed to be unaware of this. Gu Xingyin saw that many people were intoxicated because of this, and the atmosphere became more lively. Don't you think this is cruel? She asked. Lilith's face was pale. She was obviously frightened. Her brother, Kyle, looked at Gu Xingyin strangely. This is the usual practice of the Colosseum. Before the official battle, there will be a temporary warm-up. It is also to give the audience a thrill. Only blood and death can give people the most direct impact, isn't it? Gu Xingyin looked at Kyle, who was smiling gently, and said such cruel words casually. She felt a chill in her heart. She wanted to stop it, but the system warned her sternly. Host, the Colosseum is a normal setting in the original plot. Host should not destroy it. Gu Xingyin could only give up. Her attention was also attracted by another figure in the cage. It was a skinny young man who was running around in the cage, dodging the sharp teeth of the Thunderwing beast time and time again. Gu Xingyin knew that it was Eve Heiss, the person who indirectly killed Veronica in the original plot. Eve only heard the mysterious man say in her mind, "Relax, don't resist." She did as she was told and realized that her body was actually out of her control. She could see that she was cleverly dodging the Thunderwing Beast's attacks, with her seemingly limping footsteps again and again. A mere Tier 6 reptile dares to be impudent in front of me. The mysterious person snorted coldly, the disdain in his tone not concealed in the slightest. Eve felt a surge of hot blood in her chest. Was this what it meant to be strong? Even a powerful magical beast like the Thunderwing Beast was nothing more than a little worm in his eyes. Gu Xingyin looked at the scene. She was not worried about Eve Heather at all. With the Devil King, who had lived for 10,000 years, it would be difficult for her to die even if she wanted to. The Demon King in the field had a strange feeling. It was as if someone was watching him. And that person was the reason why he had been unable to calm down. The reason why he had been so eager to rush to the royal capital. His divine sense swept across the audience and quickly locked onto a place. There was a figure in a black cloak. His face could not be seen, but judging from his figure, he should still be in the growth stage of a human. The Demon King only felt that his soul was about to burn. He wanted to go to the figure's side and lift his cloak to see who it was that could affect him so deeply. There was only one survivor left in the field, and that was Eve Heather, whose body was being controlled by the Demon King. Every time people thought that she was about to be buried in the tiger's mouth, this small figure always managed to escape by the skin of her teeth. This could not go on. Sooner or later, the clues would be found out. The Demon King's expression turned cold. Chapter 72. In a place where no one could see, the eyes of the girl who was running for her life suddenly turned into a pure black color, as if an endless whirlpool was condensing in her eyes. When the thunder-winged lion met her eyes, its body suddenly stagnated for a moment. Then it suddenly roared towards the sky, and its body suddenly grew bigger. Oh no, that thunder-winged lion has gone crazy. The host suddenly panicked. As soon as he finished speaking, the cage made of secret steel was knocked open by the thunder-winged lion, who had lost all sense of reason. The thunder-winged lion went straight towards the audience. That place was filled with the underground Colosseum's distinguished guests, and there was no lack of distinguished guests. If anything happened, no matter how powerful the underground Colosseum was, there would be no small amount of trouble. Several figures flew towards the thunder-winged lion. They were the underground Colosseum's consecrators. These strong people were all supported by the underground Colosseum, at a huge cost. Usually there were very few opportunities for them to fight. But at this time, only they could suppress the thunder-winged lion. The thunder-winged lion was quickly subdued. But how could the Demon King let them off so easily? The little slave who had been lying on the ground with no one knew if he was dead or alive, had a mysterious smile on his face. At the same time, the underground Colosseum was filled with the roars of magical beasts. The magical beasts were going crazy. Countless magical beasts ran out of their cages and bit everyone they saw. They were originally the overlords of the forest and grassland, but they were forcefully captured by these humans and sold to this place to fight for their lives, for the entertainment of others. One could imagine the resentment in their hearts. The underground Colosseum was in a mess at this moment. The nobles were all pale and wanted to escape. But at this time, there were crazy magical beasts everywhere. If they were not careful, they could be bitten by the rioting magical beasts. Gu Xingyin and the rest walked together towards the exit of the Colosseum. Ah! A familiar voice was heard. Gu Xingyin looked back and saw a noble lady in red sitting on the ground. Beside her was a guard who was lying in a pool of blood. Obviously, he could no longer protect his master. Joanna could already smell the fishy smell coming from the magical beast's mouth. She closed her eyes in despair. However, the expected pain did not appear. She opened her eyes and saw a golden sword light cutting the demonic beast in half. "Miss Raymond, is your magic staff just for decoration?" Gu Xingyin sternly shouted at her. "You." Xiaoanna looked at Gu Xingyin blankly. She did not expect that Gu Xingyin would save her. "Get up, Miss Raymond. We don't have much time to waste on the ground." Xiaoanna stared blankly at the hand in front of her. She pursed her lips and stood up with Gu Xingyin's hand. She lowered her head and thanked Gu Xingyin. A faint smile appeared on Gu Xingyin's face, which was hidden under the cloak. In the original novel, Xiao Anna was not a bad girl. She was just a little girl who was spoiled by her family. When he saw her, he thought of Cheng Shiji, the original host in the previous world. The original group of 4 became a group of 5 people. Fortunately, they were either warriors or magicians. The level of these crazy magical beasts was not too high. Finally, they arrived at the entrance of the Colosseum without any accident. Just when Gu Xingyin breathed a sigh of relief, a small figure suddenly rushed towards her at a very fast speed. Chapter 73. Although the figure was extremely fast, that was only for ordinary people. For a great swordsman like Gu Xingyin, it was nothing. However, Gu Xingyin did not manage to dodge the seemingly slow collision. She took 2 steps back and was supported by Joanna, who was standing behind her. The cloak that had been covering her face fell off. However, the figure was knocked to the ground by the force of the collision. Gu Xingyin's expression changed. The figure was Eve Heather. The Demon King deliberately bumped into her. The cloaked figure looked like a noble. With Eve's identity, if she missed this chance, she did not know when she would meet her again. She could only think of a way. The moment Gu Xingyin's cloak fell off, the Demon King felt that his heart was in his mouth. He hated those dazzling colors the most, but he felt that the girl in front of him, with her long golden hair, was so charming. Her beautiful green eyes, and her delicate lips, no matter how he looked at it, she looked like someone from the light camp, which he hated the most. However, the Demon King only felt his heart beat when he looked at her. I fell into the trap of the goddess of love, the Demon King thought. He had lived for more than 10,000 years, and this was the first time he was moved by a human who looked so small. What reason should he find to follow her? The Demon King thought quickly in his heart, and from the corner of his eye, he saw a monster rushing towards them. Gu Xingyin watched as the tiny figure stood in front of him and was stabbed in the thigh by the armored rhinoceros. She opened her eyes wide in confusion. What is happening? The Demon King got what he wanted. The White Rose family's upbringing would not allow Gu Xingyin to ignore her savior. She brought the injured Eve Heather back to the Duke's mansion. When the Duchess saw her daughter come back with a person covered in blood, she was almost scared to death. She was only relieved after Gu Xingyin briefly explained to her. She was also very grateful to her daughter's benefactor. She personally arranged for Eve to stay in the guest's room and invited the most famous doctor in the palace to treat her daughter. Gu Xingyin was not in a good state at the moment. She looked at the strange man, who suddenly appeared in her room with vigilance. "Who are you?" she asked coldly. Of course, Gu Xingyin knew who he was, but she never thought that the Devil King would appear so quickly. Could it be that he actually wanted to make a move in the Duke's mansion? She placed her hand on the protective enchantment in the space ring. Her godfather, the Archbishop of the Carter Empire, had personally set it up for her. The Demon King pretended not to see her little action. He just looked greedily at Gu Xingyin, with an unfathomable smile in his eyes. "What a cute little girl. Are you willing to sign a contract with me?" Gu Xingyin called out to the system. "This is different from the plot. Isn't it Eve Heather who signed the contract with him?" The system was also confused. The Demon King saw Gu Xingyin's vigilance, and he was a little annoyed. In his heart, this little girl should not show such an expression to him. She should be looking at him with eyes full of trust and dependence, and her eyes were full of him. "You have no other choice but to sign a contract with me. Otherwise, you can imagine the lives of the entire White Rose Duke's mansion." Chapter 74. Gu Xingyin knew how cruel the Demon King was. Although she felt strange that he did not directly ask for her soul, but wanted to sign a contract with her. The Demon King saw that Gu Xingyin agreed, and was very satisfied. He called out to Gu Xingyin, "Come here." Gu Xingyin walked forward. The Demon King reached out an illusory hand and touched Gu Xingyin's forehead, his mouth chanting a mysterious rune. A black fog gushed out from the Demon King's mouth and slowly wrapped around Gu Xingyin's body. Gu Xingyin was surprised to find that the discomfort she imagined did not appear. She remembered that in the original plot, when Eve Heather and the Demon King signed a master-slave contract, it was very painful. The system said, "Of course you won't feel any pain. What you both signed just now was a symbiotic contract." Gu Xingyin said, Oh, so that's how it is. Wait, what did you just say? Symbiotic contract? Gu Xingyin was really surprised. The symbiotic contract in this world was not a joke. It was just like its name, symbiotic. Both parties who signed the contract would be one body. You live and I live, you die and I die. Could it be that this demon king had misread the incantation? The demon king looked at the serious girl, who was looking at him with a blank expression. Why? Gu Xingyin asked. Why did you sign a symbiotic contract with me? She did not believe that the demon king would be so kind. The demon king held his chin. Maybe it's because you're too beautiful. I fell in love with you at first sight. Gu Xingyin's answer was to roll her eyes. Take it. A necklace flew into Gu Xingyin's arms. The necklace was a dark diamond-shaped crystal. The chain was made of an unknown material. It shone like stars. My soul is now living in this necklace. You have to take good care of it. Gu Xingyin would have taken good care of it even if he did not say anything. After all, their lives were connected. She had to cherish her own life. She still had to find her lover in the future. The Demon King's next action once again broke Gu Xingyin's understanding. Looking for the fountain of life? The Demon King nodded calmly. My physical body has long been burned to ashes. Now, only my soul remains imprisoned in this bright light chain. Naturally, I need the spring of life to nourish my soul and create a new body. Gu Xingyin was surprised again. System. Didn't the Demon King to recover quickly by devouring the souls of the living? Why are you taking the moderate path now? System. There are too many illogical things in this world. The problem is that it can't find any reason. Seeing that the system remained silent, Gu Xingyin understood. This meant that the system could not answer her for the time being. Regardless, to Xingyin's the demon, it was a good thing. As a symbiotic contract for a symbiotic contract as a symbiosis contract to a would not, as a symbiotic contract she. When Eve woke up, the scene in front of her made her dizzy. She had never seen such a bright and beautiful room, and had never slept on such a soft and fragrant bed. The pain from her thigh told her that this was not a dream. Subconsciously, she reached out to grab the necklace on her neck. Unexpectedly, it was empty. Eve immediately panicked. She struggled to get up. Miss, you're awake? Is there anything I can do for you? The maid who heard the commotion and walked in was shocked to see Eve like this. Chapter 75. Where's my necklace? Did you see it? Eve asked anxiously. It's a black diamond-shaped necklace about this big. She gestured. The maid was puzzled. We cleaned your body and bandaged your wounds, but we didn't see the necklace you mentioned. Eve's heart was cold. During this time, she had been used to relying on that mysterious lord. Now that he had suddenly disappeared, she felt empty in her heart. Your Highness. At this time, the maid suddenly bowed in a direction with a respectful expression. Eve looked up and was stunned for a moment. Other than that lord, she had never seen such a good-looking person. No, the two were obviously very different. That lord's appearance was like a seductive but fatal flower, tempting ignorant mortals to fall. But this lord was like the embodiment of God's light in the human world, beautiful, pure, noble and inviolable. Gu Xingyin asked the maid to leave, and she took out the necklace from the space ring. Eve's mind was immediately attracted. Eve, black smoke gushed out from the necklace, and turned into the handsome man in the air. Your Highness. Eve was happy. The Demon King did not say anything, and pointed at Eve's forehead. This is the way I promised you to improve your aptitude. Eve instantly understood what he meant. She was a little flustered. Your Highness, are you leaving? The Demon King looked at the expressionless Gu Xingyin and smiled deeply. I've found the person I'm looking for. Eve glanced at Gu Xingyin and suddenly realized what was going on. At that time, the reason why the Demon King had been urging her to come to the king's city was because of this lord. Eve felt a little lost, but she also understood that the Demon King did not owe her anything. On the contrary, he had helped her a lot along the way. She was in no position to ask him to stay. Gu Xingyin spoke. Are you willing to stay in the Duke's mansion? She had her own selfish motives. After Eve Heather's talent had been modified, her talent could be said to be monstrous. If such a person were to become a member of the Duke's mansion, she would be of great help in the future. This was a pleasant surprise for Eve. When she first came to the royal city, she didn't know anyone and was worried about finding a place to stay. She agreed to Gu Xingyin's suggestion without much hesitation. The Demon King also made Eve swear an oath that she would not reveal anything about him to anyone. Although Eve didn't know who His Excellency was, she could tell from his appearance that he wasn't a simple character. She didn't object to this oath. It was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. She would bury His Excellency's existence in the deepest corner of her memory in the future. At night, Gu Xingyin came out of the shower and wiped her wet hair with a towel. "My dear, you smell so good." The Demon King took a deep breath, pretending to be intoxicated. Gu Xingyin was already used to his behavior. He couldn't touch her anyway. "Your Excellency Demon King, please conduct yourself with dignity." Because of the symbiotic contract, the Demon King's identity was not concealed. Gu Xingyin also doubted whether this person was her lover. But when she thought about her previous 2 lives, whether it was Ji Yu or Yuan Su, they were both overbearing and gentle. But the Demon King in front of her was clearly a frivolous old hooligan. Chapter 76. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, Gu Xingyin had graduated from Carter Royal Academy. It had been 3 years since she met the Demon King. There were countless treasures in the Duke's mansion. The Demon King's recovery speed was amazing. He could even transform into a real body for a short time. He just needed to find the spring of life and build a new body. Then he could return to his peak strength. Today was the graduation ball of Carter Royal Academy. 3 years was enough time for Veronica to grow from a young girl to a beauty that could cause the downfall of a city. She was the pearl of the empire. However, this beauty was too cold and arrogant. Her strength was too domineering. Gu Xingyin graduated from the Royal Academy as the top student in her year. The Carter Royal Academy even made an exception to create a statue for her in the academy. This was an honor that only those who had made great contributions to the academy could enjoy. There was only one reason for Gu Xingyin's statue to appear here. Her talent was amazing. A 16-year-old legendary swordswoman. No one doubted that this girl would become another sword saint of the Carter Empire. Gu Xingyin was not interested in dancing. Except for the opening dance, she had been sitting there the whole time. This was the 10th person she had refused. Gu Xingyin knew that some bored noble boys must be betting on who could ask her out. "Nika." A pleasant male voice sounded. It was the second prince. The second prince, who was already an adult, was already a handsome man. He was wearing a white ceremonial robe that represented the royal family. The military uniform made his figure look even more tall and straight. It was unknown how many noble ladies' gazes were fixed on him. "You've broken the hearts of many men tonight," the second prince joked. Gu Xingyin glanced at him. There are also many girls who want to be the second prince's wife who are secretly sad. The second prince looked at Gu Xingyin, who was serious even when she was joking, and felt helpless. "Then, beautiful Miss Roman, would you like to dance with me?" The second prince's expression was calm, but his expectant eyes betrayed his thoughts. Gu Xingyin shook her head. "Sorry." In the beginning, she had also suspected that it was the second prince, but after so many times of approaching him, she did not smell the familiar lotus fragrance from the second prince. Nor did she feel the feeling that made her heart beat faster from him. Since there wouldn't be any results, she shouldn't give him any hope. The second prince left with a gloomy look in his eyes. Gu Xingyin ate the fruit alone. Suddenly the aura around her changed. A certain demon king was sitting beside her. "Are you crazy? Show yourself here." Gu Xingyin shouted. Over the past 3 years, she and the demon king had gotten along rather well. Although the demon king she knew was a little thick-skinned, he wasn't as cruel and bloodthirsty as described in the plot. The demon king would often teach her some swordsmanship, or other things that had been lost on the continent. She was able to improve so quickly in 3 years because of the demon king. The relationship between the two was like that of a teacher and a friend. In Gu Xingyin's heart, the demon king was already someone she cared about. The demon king coldly looked at the teenagers who were staring at Gu Xingyin. He casually replied, "Don't worry, these people won't be able to discover my existence." He really couldn't help it. His little girl was too charming, attracting too many wild bees and butterflies. Chapter 77. However, he did not know if it was because he had always acted too unreliable. But no matter what he said, Gu Xingyin only took it as a joke. Like now. The Demon King said, "So many little brats are thinking about you, how can I hold back?" Gu Xingyin's response was to ignore this sentence. The devil was a little angry. Heroine, a bright figure appeared in Gu Xingyin's vision. Joanna sat down beside her. Joanna had now grown into a young lady. She was tall and slender, and unlike Gu Xingyin's exquisite features, she had a beautiful face. She was like a blooming red plum, and there were many followers behind her. Joanna's attitude towards Gu Xingyin changed a lot since Gu Xingyin saved her from the demon beast 3 years ago. Although her words were still unforgiving, Gu Xingyin could feel Joanna's kindness towards him. Joanna looked at Gu Xingyin, who was leisurely eating fruit, with some envy. "I really envy you. You are the only successor of the Duke's mansion. You will never have my troubles." Gu Xingyin understood why Joanna was sighing. She was the youngest daughter of the Minister of Finance. Although she was very spoiled at home, she was a child of a noble family. When necessary, she had to contribute her own strength to the family. For example, marriage. Joanna's eyes were a little lonely. "My family has made a decision. If I can't win the heart of the second prince, next year, I will have to choose one of the noble sons to be my husband." Joanna of the Raymond family liked the second prince of the royal family. This was known in the noble circle of the empire. It was also an open secret that the second prince had been chasing after the heir of the White Rose family, Heroine Roman. Joanna Raymond and Veronica Roman were actually good friends, which made many people's jaws drop. Gu Xingyin thought for a long time and finally said, "There are plenty of fish in the sea. Joanna, you have to be more optimistic. Maybe your destined knight is waiting for you not far away." Joanna burst into laughter. She looked at Veronica's serious look, and the melancholy in her heart suddenly disappeared. Although he didn't quite understand the meaning behind Veronica's words, it was obvious that she didn't take the second prince seriously. She even had some malicious thoughts in her heart. "Second prince, look, you turned a blind eye to my sincerity. Now, your sincerity is nothing in Veronica's eyes. Is this what the priest meant by reincarnation?" Gu Xingyin didn't understand why Qiao Anna seemed to be in a good mood in an instant. But it was a good thing. Veronica's eyes looked around aimlessly. Suddenly, her eyes stopped at one place and couldn't move away. It was a man with long black hair. His hair was loosely tied up with a silver ribbon. His facial features were not as deep as the people of the Cat Empire. Instead, they were soft and gentle. He was standing there chatting with someone with a gentle smile on his face. Gu Xingyin was familiar with that face. She could draw that face with her eyes closed. It was Ji Yu's face in the first world. Joanna saw that Gu Xingyin's expression wasn't right. She followed her gaze and showed a knowing smile. "That's the army commander of the Sacred Alliance, Sir Lin Qi. He's a gentleman." Before she could finish, Gu Xingyin got up and walked over. Chapter 78. Joanna was a little dumbfounded. She had known Heroine for so many years, but she had never seen her so anxious. Could this be the legendary love at first sight? Gu Xingyin was so focused on looking for the person who looked exactly like Ji Yu that she didn't notice that the man she had forgotten had a dark expression on his face. Joanna felt a little cold for some reason. Gu Xingyin eagerly walked through the laughing crowd to look at the place where the man had appeared. Unfortunately, when she got there, it was already empty. Gu Xingyin felt lost. She turned to grab the hand of a noble lady and asked, "Where did the man who was standing here go? The one with black hair?" The noble lady saw her and hurriedly bowed. After hearing her question, she chuckled and said, "Are you talking about Mr. Lin Qi? Someone was looking for him just now, and he left early." Gu Xingyin walked back in a daze. Joanna looked at her and teased, "What's the matter? You didn't see him? Don't tell me you fell in love with him at first sight?" She had just been joking. She hadn't expected Gu Xingyin to not deny it. Joanna was shocked. "Are you serious? The nobles of the Carter Empire, who are chasing you, can line up outside the capital. You actually fell in love with an outsider." If this was known by Heroine's suitors, wouldn't they be extremely depressed? Gu Xingyin was a little uninterested for the rest of the night, so she didn't notice the devil's unusual silence. It wasn't until night fell that Gu Xingyin, who had just closed the door, was pressed against the door by a strong force. You! Gu Xingyin looked at the man who had imprisoned her with some surprise. The devil's expression was very bad, especially when he saw Gu Xingyin's confused look, which made him even angrier. Since he didn't know what to say, he had to take action. When the devil's kiss fell, Gu Xingyin was dizzy. What kind of development was this? Her confused expression probably pleased the Demon King, and the originally aggressive attack became gentle. The Devil King gently rubbed Gu Xingyin's lips and patiently coaxed, "Be good, open your mouth." Gu Xingyin's dizzy mind became clear because of this sentence. She struggled with all her might. "Let go of me." The Devil King's expression became gloomy again because of her resistance. He restrained Gu Xingyin's waving hands and no longer held back. The tip of his tongue opened her teeth and went straight in, kissing her thoroughly. By the time he loosened his grip, Gu Xingyin was already weak all over. However, in the next second, a golden sword beam lit up in the darkness. Although the Demon King's movements were fast, his face was still cut by the sword beam. "If there's a next time, I'll slit your throat." Gu Xingyin looked at him coldly. The Demon King didn't care about her words at all. He just looked at her and said, "Don't look at other men like that. I can't help killing him." Hearing this, Gu Xingyin glanced at him and said, "Then I'll kill you too." The Demon King smiled gently. "That's good. I'm willing to die with you." Gu Xingyin thought, damn the symbiotic contract. The dispute in the evening ended when the Demon King couldn't maintain his body. After several days, Gu Xingyin didn't see him again. On this day, Xiao Anna brought a message to Gu Xingyin, saying that there would be a banquet to welcome the guests of the Sacred Alliance in a few days. Gu Xingyin certainly wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Chapter 79. That day, Gu Xingyin specially dressed up and came to the banquet hall. She was a little excited, hoping that Lin Qi was the lover she had been looking for. But on the other hand, she felt a little guilty when she thought of the man in the necklace. Shaking off the inexplicable thoughts in her mind, Gu Xingyin found Lin Qi standing on the balcony with a glass of wine. "Why are you here alone, Sir Lin Qi?" Gu Xingyin walked up to him. Lin Qi turned around when he heard the voice. The moment he saw Gu Xingyin, a trace of surprise flashed across his eyes. "Hello, noble Princess Roman." Gu Xingyin tilted her head slightly and asked curiously, "How did you know it was me?" Lin Qi smiled gently. "Other than Princess Roman, known as the Pearl of the Carter Empire, who else would have this beauty that is favored by the gods?" Gu Xingyin raised the glass in his hand and clinked it with him happily. Lin Qi looked at her mesmerizing blonde hair, sliding down the side of her face. Her emerald green eyes were like a pool of clear water. This dreamlike beautiful woman suddenly cried out and fell in his direction. How could he refuse a beauty throwing herself at him? If Lin Qi had some doubts before, he was now sure that the Pearl of the Carter Empire had different thoughts about him. How could a legendary swordsman trip over his own dress? Lin Qi had a sense of pride that only belonged to men. He had long heard rumors about Princess Roman. She was often mentioned together with her beauty, because she was as cold as ice. Now it seemed that the rumors could not be trusted. However, Gu Xingyin was very disappointed. Without that familiar smell, he was not him. Before Lin Qi could say anything, she stood up and tidied up her skirt. "I'm really sorry, Sir Lin Qi. I was rude just now," Gu Xingyin apologized. Lin Qi felt that the woman in front of him had changed in an instant. Just a moment ago, she was still chatting happily with him. Just as he was about to take the next step, she expressionlessly said goodbye. It was as if the hug just now was just a soft dream. Gu Xingyin was filled with disappointment. She just wanted to leave as soon as possible. She nodded at Lin Qi and turned around. He fell into a cold embrace. "You?" Gu Xingyin looked at the man, who shouldn't have appeared in this place, in shock. "Darling, why didn't you tell me you were coming out?" The man held her waist and lowered his head to whisper in her ear, but his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. Everyone's eyes were on the two of them. After all, Gu Xingyin's family background and appearance made her the center of attention wherever she went. And a certain demon king was the only one who could compare to Gu Xingyin in terms of appearance. When the two of them stood together, they would definitely make everyone else look like dust. What do you want now? Gu Xingyin gritted her teeth and whispered, pulling the man outside. The man didn't resist and obediently followed her. In the eyes of outsiders, they were a perfect match, whispering intimately as they left. These people were all guessing who this mysterious man was. After all, with such an appearance and aura, it was impossible for him to be a nameless existence. Why are you here? And dressed like this? Gu Xingyin looked at him. The Demon King said lazily, "My future wife is going to leave with someone else. How can I sit still?" Chapter 80. For the first time, Gu Xingyin looked at the man seriously. "I have a lover, really?" The Demon King didn't believe it. Since she was 13 years old, he had always been the one by her side. But her tone was so certain. When she talked about her lover, even her eyes seemed to be shining. The Demon King was silent. Just when Gu Xingyin thought he was going to give up, he suddenly said, "Where is your lover?" Gu Xingyin was speechless. After a while she said, "I'm looking for him." The Demon King thought of Gu Xingyin, and that man when he entered the banquet hall. "So you threw yourself into the arms of that strange man today, because you thought he was your lover?" Gu Xingyin nodded. The Demon King almost laughed. "You don't even know what he looks like. How can you be so sure that he is your lover?" Gu Xingyin didn't want to talk to him. She couldn't tell anyone about this. Even if she told them, no one would believe in something as strange as time travel. The Demon King didn't give up. "Then why are you looking for him? Let me guess. You mistook him for someone else, so it shouldn't be because of his appearance. Then is it because of his smell? Or a mark on his body? Or is it some kind of mysterious, but not mysterious special feeling?" Gu Xingyin thought that he had guessed 80 to 90% of the time. At this moment a cold and fragrant embrace covered her. A domineering kiss fell on Gu Xingyin's lips. The Demon King's kiss was irresistible. "Then feel it carefully. Is your lover me?" Gu Xingyin pushed him away. "Enough. I'm very sure that it's not you." After that, she left without looking back. "Your Excellency?" The Demon King turned around. It was Eve, who looked surprised. Eve's life in the Duke's mansion was good. In the past 3 years, she had grown a lot taller, and was a beautiful girl. "Is it really you?" Eve trotted over. "Have you recovered?" The Demon King shook his head. "It's only temporary." Eve looked at him. She had a lot to say, but she couldn't say a word. "You saw everything?" the Demon King suddenly asked. Eve nodded. She saw His Highness push him away, but His Highness didn't see it. When she turned to leave, the man's cynical smile disappeared, and his expression was so sad. "Then help me keep an eye on her," the man suddenly said. "What?" Eve was confused. "After a while, I'll be going out. Don't let other men get close to her while I'm away." Eve nodded. Gu Xingyin had been feeling strange for the past 2 days. She always felt that something was missing from her side. It was not until Qiao Anna mentioned what happened that day that she realized that the Devil King had not appeared for several days. Could it be that she was angry with him? Gu Xingyin couldn't help but shudder at the thought of an old monster who had lived for 10,000 years sulking. 2 days later, Gu Xingyin couldn't take it anymore. She decided to admit defeat first. However, no man appeared from the space ring. Gu Xingyin was keenly aware that something was wrong. She used her spiritual power, and found that there was no trace of the man in the space ring. Did that man just leave quietly like that? Gu Xingyin didn't believe that the man would leave. However, after 1 or 2 days, 10 days, half a month, she was sure that the Devil King had really left. For some reason Gu Xingyin, who should have been relieved, felt a little wronged. He left without even saying goodbye. Chapter 81. When the man was still there, she didn't think he was important. Even affected by the original plot, she wanted to stay away from him. But now that the man really left, Gu Xingyin found that she wasn't used to it. When she practiced swordsmanship, there was no one to guide her step by step. There was no one to say that he liked her every day in a joking tone. She also didn't feel at ease, because she knew that person would always be by her side. Gu Xingyin thought about it, and felt that she was quite a scumbag. Since she couldn't respond to him, it seemed that it was good that the Demon King left her. In the blink of an eye, half a year passed. In the past 6 months, Gu Xingyin focused on practicing and improving her strength. She even lost interest in finding her lover. Speaking of which, this world really didn't have any pressure. The original Veronica Roman's soul was forcibly extracted by the Demon King because he fancied her. But according to Gu Xingyin's understanding, it was impossible for the Demon King to do such a thing. Eve Heather, who was originally a cannon fodder, had also become a female guard of the Duke of White Rose's residence. Then she just needed to be at ease as Veronica Roman and live out her life in this world according to the original plan. Thinking about it, Gu Xingyin suddenly felt a pain in her heart. It was as if someone had cut out a piece of flesh from her heart with a knife. It was the symbiotic contract. The moment she bent down, Gu Xingyin understood the source of the sudden pain. The symbiotic contract she signed with the Demon King. Then this meant that the Demon King was in danger. Gu Xingyin almost immediately panicked. She closed her eyes and slowly felt the location of the Demon King. After a long time, Gu Xingyin opened her eyes. She found her destination, the Starlight Forest in the south of the Carter Empire. The elves, known for their beauty and fighting skills, lived there. Gu Xingyin thought for a moment and understood the Demon King's idea. He should want to get the spring of life that the elves had guarded for generations to reconstruct his body. The two of them had reached an agreement on this matter. When Gu Xingyin became a sword saint, they would go to the Starlight Forest to obtain the spring of life. She didn't expect that this man would go alone without saying a word. Gu Xingyin felt a little helpless, but she didn't delay. After reporting to her parents, she stepped on the road to the Starlight Forest. No matter what, she could not sit back and watch her man fall into danger. The Demon King's current situation was indeed not very good. After all, he was the Demon King, who once reigned over the entire continent. Even though he no longer had his physical body, his realm was much higher than the current Elf King. Therefore, it was not difficult for him to sneak into the Elf tribe's forbidden area. As long as he could find the spring of life and bathe in it for 7 days, with the strength of his soul, he would be able to grow a new body. However, he underestimated the power of the fountain of life. Perhaps, it should be said that he had overestimated the spirit body's endurance. In this secret technique, a lot of supplementary materials were needed to reconstruct the body. However, the Demon King had always thought highly of himself. He believed that those who needed these external materials were not strong enough, so he disdained them. Now he suffered because of his arrogance. When the spring of life washed over him, the Demon King felt as if his soul was being roasted in a raging fire. The pain was indescribable. However, this wasn't a big deal. The crux of the matter was that the formation he had set up earlier to deceive others had shattered, because of the soul fluctuations being too great. Almost all the elves felt the movement from the forbidden area. Chapter 82. The Elven King was instantly enraged. The spring of life had always been the Elven tribe's most important treasure. Even the Elven tribe could not easily enter its location. Now, an outsider had actually broken in and caused such a huge commotion. The Demon King felt the elf race's actions, but he couldn't say anything. He was at a critical moment, so he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. If the elf race attacked him. When the King of Elves arrived with his people, he saw a translucent figure sitting in the spring of life that was emitting a faint green glow. It was a spirit. The Elf King glanced at the spring of life and couldn't help but feel distressed. According to this loss, it would take decades to recover. He was about to order his subordinates to attack when the spirit in the spring suddenly said, "I came here by accident. As you can see, I'm already sitting here. If I come out now, you've already lost everything and can't make up for it. Why don't you let me stay here for 7 days? I can swear that when I come out, I'll tell you about the Tree of Life." When the words Tree of Life came out, all the elves present became excited. The Elf King was no exception. His snow-white long eyelashes trembled as he asked suspiciously, "Outsider, you really know about the Tree of Life?" The man in the spring lazily said, "I can swear to the light god that if I lie, I'm willing to accept the punishment of the god." For all the creatures on this continent, swearing to the god was the most sincere oath. The Elf King believed him. "Then we can make an exception and let you stay in the Spring of Life for 7 days. After 7 days, I'll bring my people here to wait for you." The Elf King finished and prepared to leave. At this moment, something strange happened. The originally calm Spring of Life suddenly trembled violently. The spirit in the spring had his eyes closed and was unaware of the situation around him. It was obvious that he had lost consciousness. The elves were surprised by the change in the Spring of Life when a strange smell suddenly swept through the forbidden area. It was like the fragrance of a certain flower. The elves, who had always been known as nature's favorites, couldn't tell what kind of plant it was. "Look!" An elf suddenly pointed at the man in the spring and exclaimed. Countless white flowers suddenly bloomed around the spirit body in the spring water. The flower was very large with layers upon layers of petals. It was beautiful but not bewitching, gorgeous but not extraordinary. It carried a dignified and noble beauty. It turned out to be a species that the elves had never seen before. The previous fragrance was obviously coming from here. At the same time, on the left shoulder of the man with his eyes closed in the spring water, a mark slowly appeared, as if it was seeping out from his skin. It was the appearance of the unknown flower. The elves were stunned by this change. They could clearly sense that the moment these strange flowers appeared, the vitality of the entire Spring of Life suddenly increased by countless times. At this moment, the man in the spring opened his eyes. What kind of eyes were those? At first glance, there was only endless coldness and emptiness inside. At a second glance, it turned into endless vitality and reincarnation. When he looked at her again, his eyes were filled with compassion and compassion. All the elves could only think of one word when they saw such a look in his eyes: God. Chapter 83. Gu Xingyin arrived at the Starlight Forest without stopping. The closer she got, the stronger the symbiotic contract felt. Obviously, she was very close to the Demon King. However, ever since she felt the pain in her heart, she no longer felt this uncomfortable. Thinking about it, the Demon King's crisis had been resolved. After all, he was an old monster who had lived for tens of thousands of years. How could something happen to him so easily? However, thinking about it was just thinking. Without seeing him in person, Gu Xingyin was still worried. The Starlight Forest was full of danger. Although the elves loved nature, they were not very friendly to humans, especially those who trespassed into their territory. Just the endless monsters and plants in the forest were enough to stop the average person. However, Gu Xingyin, who had the system, obviously did not belong to the category of average person. It was already night. Gu Xingyin chose a safe place to rest for the night. She closed her eyes and chatted with the system. "System, do you think he will be reincarnated with me in this world?" The system, unable to find the target's information, unable to answer the host's question. With Gu Xingyin as its host, the system had to say that it had gained a lot of knowledge. All kinds of things that had never happened before were now normal around Gu Xingyin. "Gu Xingyin, I don't know why, but my desire to find him in this world is not that strong." Before she finished speaking, Gu Xingyin's face suddenly changed. She could feel that her dou qi in her body was increasing at a terrifying speed. It was completely out of her control. This was the power of the symbiotic contract. What did the Demon King do? How could it increase her strength so much? Gu Xingyin's mind gradually became absent-minded. Her spiritual energy was somewhat unable to control the speed of the dou qi in her body. If this continued, she did not know what would happen. Boom! Gu Xingyin felt something shatter. Her consciousness also fell into a deep sleep. At the same time, not far from here, in the elves' territory, the black-haired man opened his eyes. A dark light flashed across his eyes, and his figure moved, disappearing on the spot. As soon as Gu Xingyin regained her consciousness, she fell into a familiar lotus fragrance. She sniffled nostalgically and moved her head. Only then did she realize that she was in a familiar embrace. "You're awake?" A deep voice with a smile sounded. The Demon King looked at the person in his arms, who was rubbing against his chest like a Siamese cat. This voice. Gu Xingyin opened her eyes and saw a smiling face. Gu Xingyin blinked, then blinked again. "That's right, this familiar face." "Demon King?" The man laughed and leaned over to kiss her on the cheek. "You're not mistaken, my dear, it's me." Gu Xingyin sniffed. The smell was right. So the lover she had been looking for was actually the Demon King. She looked at the man's neck. The Demon King was wearing a black robe. Gu Xingyin reached out her hand. Rip! Gu Xingyin never thought that the fabric would be so fragile. She looked at the man seriously and said expressionlessly, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake." Although she said that, her eyes could not help but look below the man's neck. Sure enough, she saw the familiar lotus mark. The man did not care whether she made a mistake or not. "I didn't expect my dear to be so enthusiastic when you wake up. I can't neglect a beauty." A hot kiss immediately covered her mouth. Chapter 84. Because she had confirmed that he was her lover, Gu Xingyin did not refuse. Her acquiescence made the Demon King ecstatic. For a moment, the two of them were unable to restrain themselves. After the kiss, Gu Xingyin fell into the man's arms, gasping for breath. Her white skin was dyed red, and her green eyes were soft like spring water. This appearance made the man almost unable to restrain himself. The Demon King kissed the treasure in his arms. "What, you're not going to find your lover?" he deliberately said. Gu Xingyin took the initiative to give her lover a kiss. "You are my lover." Feeling the familiar hard thing on her thigh, Gu Xingyin secretly laughed, but her expression did not change. This man had always treated her so carefully, even after confirming their relationship in the previous 2 worlds. No matter how hard he endured, he did not touch her before they got married. Because that man had said to her, "You are the most precious treasure in this world. I can't have you so carelessly." The Demon King kissed the top of her head and suddenly said, "Feel the changes in your body." Gu Xingyin did as she was told. I actually broke through to Sword Saint." She was in disbelief. This was Sword Saint, the peak power of an empire. The Demon King said with a smile, "I have reconstructed my body, and my strength has returned to its peak. With the symbiotic contract, it is not strange for you to break through to Sword Saint. If it wasn't for the fact that you are too young and can't withstand another breakthrough, it would be more than this." His words were full of regret. Gu Xingyin did not know whether to laugh or cry. A 16-year-old Sword Saint expert. You can't be too greedy. The Demon King thought about it and agreed. In any case, he would always be by her side, so Sword Saint was enough. "That's right, where is this?" Gu Xingyin realized that she was in a strange place. "This is the residence of the elves." The Demon King replied. Gu Xingyin was amazed as she looked around. The decorations here were not as gorgeous as the Duke's mansion. But in terms of delicacy, the Duke's mansion could not compare. "Let's go. I'll take you to the elves' territory to have a look." The Demon King held Gu Xingyin's hand and walked outside. The elves were indeed a race favored by nature. The elves that Gu Xingyin saw along the way, regardless of whether they were male or female, old or young, were all rare beauties in the human world. However, Gu Xingyin always felt that it was very strange. When these elves saw the two of them, they all had expressions of awe and even worship. She was not narcissistic enough to think that these emotions were because of her. She voiced her doubts. The Demon King replied casually, "About that, I only told them about the Tree of Life. You know, if you live longer, you will know more than others." He hid what happened to him in the spring of life. It wasn't that he was trying to hide it, but that even he was unable to explain the situation. Gu Xingyin's mouth twitched when she heard the Demon King's answer. However, she also understood why the elves were so friendly to them. The Tree of Life was the divine tree of the elves. It was said that every elf was born from the Tree of Life, and when the elves died, their souls would be taken away by the Tree of Life, waiting for their next rebirth. The Tree of Life of the elves suddenly disappeared thousands of years ago, which caused the elves to not have any new elves for thousands of years. Although a few thousand years was not a particularly long time for the long-lived elves, it was undeniable that without new blood, the elves would eventually die out one day. Chapter 85. There was a lively event in the White Rose Duke's mansion recently. Have you heard? Her Highness brought a man back from her training. Of course, I also saw him. TSK, he's really good looking. He's a good match for Our Highness. I just don't know who he is. After all, Our Highness is the next Duke of White Rose. His daughter went out for training and came back with a lover. Even though Duke Richard was mentally strong, he felt a little confused when he heard the news. The Duchess was very satisfied with the man her daughter brought back. The Devil King was handsome and knew how to please people. In less than a day, he coaxed the Duchess into smiling when she saw him. The Devil King knew people's hearts well and knew what countermeasures to take for each person. It took him less than half a day to win the Duchess' favor, and it took even less time to win the Duke's approval. The process was simple. He and Duke Richard had a fierce fight in the martial arts field of the Duke's mansion. The Devil King, who had won the approval of the Duke couple, did not slack off. He could not live in the Duke's mansion with his baby. Even if Gu Xingyin did not care, there would definitely be all kinds of rumors. He could not bear to let his baby be wronged. So, half a month later, the Emperor of the Carter Empire proudly announced to all his ministers that the Empire had one more sword saint expert and personally conferred him the title of Earl. When the opponents of the White Rose family were laughing at their heir's taste in choosing a partner, the Devil King used practical actions to tell them what it meant to be slapped in the face. The following days were the time for Her Highness Roman and the new Earl Norman to show off their love. When you went out to watch an opera, you could inadvertently look up and see Her Highness Roman sitting there. And Earl Norman was carefully picking out the ingredients she did not like for the snacks in front of her. At the palace banquet, as long as a man appeared beside Her Highness Roman, Earl Norman would immediately appear beside his fiancée and hold her waist possessively to declare his sovereignty. Do you think Her Highness will be unhappy? Take a look. Who is that woman with a sweet smile on her face? People who lived in the capital would often see Her Highness and Count Norman strolling together on the streets. Because Her Highness did not like to be followed by servants, Count Norman, a noble count and sacred swordsman expert, would carry the trinkets that Her Highness took a fancy to along the way without complaint. This directly led to the unmarried ladies of the royal capital looking up to Count Norman when they were choosing their future husbands, leading to the birth of a batch of older, leftover women. As for the married ladies, they would complain to their husbands about how considerate and attentive Norman was to his fiancée. They were both women, but why was there such a huge difference between them? This anecdote was called the Earl Norman effect by later historians. Eve was now a captain of the Duke's private guards. As she watched the interaction between His Highness and the Count, she would sometimes fantasize. If she was the one who had always stayed by the Count's side back then, would she be the one by his side now? Captain! Eve turned around. It was one of her guards. It was said that he was also from a small noble family. His family used to be a viscount. Eve looked at him suspiciously. The guard's face flushed red. After a while he said, "Our family will have a bonfire party tomorrow night. Do you want to go with me?" Eve looked at him seriously and suddenly smiled. Okay. It was time for her to pursue her own happiness. Chapter 86. Veronica Roman, the 11th Duchess of the White Rose, had lived a glorious life. Her talent was incredible. At the age of 16, she successfully became a sword saint. This record had not been surpassed by anyone, even tens of thousands of years after her death, and after the Carter Empire had been annihilated in the dust of history. She was invincible. She led the White Rose army of the Carter Empire and was invincible. In her lifetime, she had doubled the territory of the Carter Empire. She was conferred the title of Honorable Duchess by His Majesty, and her scepter was engraved with the noblest titles of the two empires. She had a discerning eye. Eve Heather, who was known as the Genius Sword Saint, was discovered by her when she was down and out. She brought her to the Roman family and started Eve Heather's glorious journey. Her appearance was beautiful. It was recorded in the history books that Princess Veronica was the incarnation of God in the world and the messenger of light. Anyone who saw her would be impressed by her appearance and temperament. During her reign, her suitors could line up from the Duke's mansion to the gate of the capital. However, the most popular topic of conversation was still the unswerving love between the Duchess and her husband, Count Norman. Earl Norman's origin was mysterious. The first time he appeared in the public, I was as the lover of the Duchess, a sword saint. Ever since the two of them were together, they had never been separated. Whether it was playing, going on diplomatic missions, or war, Earl Norman would appear wherever the Duchess of White Rose was. It was said that the two of them had signed a symbiotic contract. They would live together and die together. The love between the two of them was written in countless biographies and spread widely in later years. Gu Xingyin was very happy in this life. When she left, she already had feelings. She, who was no longer young, held her husband's hand and smiled sweetly. "I'll go first. In the next life, remember to come and find me." The black-haired, black-clothed, handsome man looked at his wife, who was sleeping peacefully with her eyes closed. He gently leaned over and kissed her lips. "Fool, have you forgotten the contract between us? You don't have to go first. I'm right behind you." Gu Xingyin opened her eyes in the pure white space with a smile on her face. She didn't stop smiling and said to the system in front of her, "I don't have any problems, and I don't need to rest. We can move on to the next mission." She was very sure that her lover would be waiting for her in another world, so she didn't want to stay in a place without him. This was the system's first time meeting a host who couldn't wait to complete a task. However, as long as the host's decision was beneficial to completing the mission, as a system, it had no right to interfere. The next world is the immortal cultivation world. "Host, please check the world's information." Gu Xingyin's vision turned black. After the familiar dizziness disappeared, she found herself kneeling in a large hall. She lowered her head and looked at her hand. It was thin and soft. It was obviously a little girl's hand. There were hundreds of children kneeling in the hall. They were dressed similarly to Gu Xingyin, and they all looked about 7 or 8 years old. "Since you're able to enter this hall today, you're disciples of my Starnet Sword sect. However, being able to enter this hall only proves that your foundation is suitable for cultivation. As for sword cultivation, the most important thing is the sword heart in your body. Now let's start testing your sword heart. The level of your sword heart will determine how far you can go on the path of sword cultivation." Chapter 87. Gu Xingyin quietly knelt in the hall. Her face was calm, unlike other children. One by one, the children walked to the front and stood in a specific place. Gu Xingyin knew that there was a special formation there. When people stood in it, they would show different reactions. Lin Yisheng, Wood of the 5 Elements, Level 3 Sword Heart, can enter the outer sect. A misty green halo appeared in the formation, and the elder reported the level of his sword heart. Lan Yingyue, Water of the 5 Elements, Level 5 Sword Heart, can enter the inner sect. Gu Xingyin listened quietly as the elder reported the numbers one by one. In this world where the sword was revered, the sword heart determined whether a person could become a swordsman. At the same time, it determined how far a swordsman could go on the path of the sword. The sword heart was divided into 3 levels. The low-level sword heart was Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. The medium-level sword heart was Level 4, Level 6. The high-level sword heart was Level 7, Level 8, Level 9. The higher the level of the sword heart, the higher the talent in the path of the sword, and the higher the compatibility with the life-bound sword. However, although the sword was revered in the endless sky great world, only 1 in 10,000 people could become a swordsman with a sword heart. As the largest sword sect in the endless sky great world, the Starnet Sword sect's standards for selecting disciples were naturally much higher than ordinary sections. At this moment, the hundreds of children in the hall had all passed the basic test, and all of them had a sword heart. At this moment, a girl not far from Gu Xingyin stood up. She attracted Gu Xingyin's attention. This girl was the target of Gu Xingyin's mission in this world. Bai Xingya was born in a middle-class family in the endless sky great world. Her mother was the concubine of that family's head, but she was rather doted on. Bai Xingya had lived a life of luxury since she was young. The biggest blow she had suffered was probably the Star Azura sword sect's recruitment of new disciples this time. Bai Xingya, water element, level 1 sword heart, can join the outer sect. Bai Xingya's eyes were wide open, as if she had never imagined that her sword heart was only at the first level. She seemed to be at a loss of what to do. Her big eyes were quickly filled with tears, making her look very lovable. The elder beside her seemed to have rarely encountered such a situation. Seeing Bai Xingya like this, the usually strict sword cultivator actually softened his voice, which was rare for him. He coaxed her. Don't worry too much about it. As long as you cultivate diligently, it's not like there aren't any swordsmen who become strong in the end despite their low level of sword heart. Gu Xingyin found it a little strange. She asked doubtfully, I already know the plot. Bai Xingya's talent is obviously very ordinary, and her looks are not peerless. Why would there be so many men willing to offer everything just to make her happy? Moreover, no matter how cold and ruthless a person is, there is no way to be fierce in front of her. The system was suspiciously silent for a moment, then replied, Host, you may not know, but in this world, there is something called the White Lotus Halo. Before Gu Xingyin had time to be popularized as to what this White Lotus Halo was, she heard her name. Gu Weixin. She stood up slowly and walked to the center of the array with a calm expression. The elder in charge of the test also looked at her curiously. The children who were brought here were generally 7 or 8 years old. When they came for the test, they were either uneasy or eager to try. It was rare to see someone as calm as Gu Xingyin. Chapter 88. Gu Xingyin did not pay attention to what the elder was thinking. Her body was called Gu Weixin, and she was a direct descendant of a super family in the sky below great world. The children of these families always matured earlier than others, so no one would doubt her calmness. Moreover, no one knew Gu Weixin's aptitude better than Gu Xingyin. Icy Heart Clear, advance courageously. 10th level Ice Soul Sword Heart. As soon as the elder finished speaking, everyone in the hall, except for the children who were still in a daze, looked at Gu Xingyin in unison. In addition, there were several powerful spiritual senses from all over the star-gathering sword sect that descended on Gu Xingyin's body. The elder in charge of Gu Xingyin's test seemed very excited. He looked like he wanted to laugh, but his long years of expressionless face made his whole face somewhat distorted. He did not say where Gu Xingyin could be assigned, but let her stand alone on the other side to wait. Gu Xingyin still walked to the side with a calm expression. The elder looked at her and thought to himself that this girl probably did not understand what a 10th level sword heart represented. Otherwise, how could she be so calm? How could Gu Xingyin not know? The sword heart was divided into 10 levels, and the 10th level was the highest quality sword heart. This body's aptitude was the 1 in 10,000 10th level sword heart, and even rarer was the rarely seen Ice Soul Sword Heart. According to the 5 elements, the Ice Soul Sword Heart should belong to water, but it was mutated from the water element. A mutated sword heart could not only make a swordsman's attacks more powerful, but even rarer, it would carry some characteristics that the 5 elements did not have. For example, if the Ice Soul Sword Heart was cultivated to a high level, the sword intent could freeze thousands of miles. And the power of the Ice Soul Sword Heart did not stop there. Its greatest characteristic was that the ice heart was clear, otherwise it would be dust. In other words, Gu Weixin's path of the sword would not be entangled by mental demons. The greatest obstacle to a sword cultivator was mental demons. With Gu Xingyin in front of her, everyone else's brilliance was overshadowed. Even though there were several talented disciples with high-level sword heart, the higher-ups of the star-gathering sword school still focused on Gu Xingyin. There was no other reason. Ordinary high-level sword heart swordsmen might be able to become sword emperors, sword venerables, or even sword masters through diligent cultivation. However, if one wanted to become a peak sword saint, one had to have a 10th order sword heart. sword emperors, sword venerables, and even sword grandmasters. The Star Azura Sword School had no lack of them. However, even with the Star Azura Sword Sect's foundation, they only had 2 sword saints. One of them had already lived for a very long time, and had been in seclusion for many years. Only the upper echelons of the sword faction knew that the Great Elder was on the verge of death. And these 2 sword saints were the guarantee of the Star Azura Sword Sect's position. Therefore, the current Star Azura Sword Sect urgently needed a new sword saint powerhouse to stabilize their position. Gu Xingyin stood among the elders, and watched as the hundreds of disciples were assigned to different sects one by one. Those with excellent sword heart aptitudes were accepted as personal disciples by the main peak elders. In the end, only she was left. She stood there quietly and did not speak. In the eyes of others, she was born with the bearing of a master. In reality, Gu Xingyin was only listening to the system's so-called White Lotus halo. As expected, powerful, Gu Xingyin exclaimed. No wonder with the original body's attributes that were like cheating, she would also be defeated by Xingya. Chapter 89. The voice of the system sounded in Gu Xingyin's mind. The so-called White Lotus halo. Anyone who is illuminated by this halo will lose the ability to judge, the infinite beautification of the halo owner in the mind. The original body Gu Weixin, I have to say, can be called perfect in all aspects. Family background needless to say, the Gu clan is a top family in the whole Tianlong continent. Talent needless to say, the 10th Order Ice Soul Sword Heart has the potential to become a sword saint. Even her appearance is described in the original plot. She stands there, like the most cold and flawless ice and snow on the holy mountain in the north. Autumn water is the god, ice jade is the bone. And if she smiles gently, it is like 10 miles of spring breeze, melting ice and snow, blooming flowers, and her face is frightening. However, she was such a perfect woman in every aspect. Yet the first man she fell in love with decisively abandoned her after seeing Xingya. What's more, when Xingya was injured by the fire poison, the man didn't know where to find out that as long as he used the blood of the heart of the person who had the Ice Soul Sword Heart, he could detoxify the fire poison. He even relied on Gu Weixin's trust to drug her, and forcibly took out her heart blood. Poor Gu Weixin's realm was greatly reduced, and he encountered the invasion of the demon clan. He even lost his life. I don't kill Boren, but Boren died because of me. However, the man didn't care about his own sins at all. He only cared about love with Xingya. Xingya didn't even ask how her poison was detoxified. She was with a man with a clear conscience. Gu Xingyin sneers. The fire poison is incurable except for the blood of the heart of the person who has the Ice Soul Sword Heart. In the whole Tianlong continent, only Gu Weixin is the Ice Soul Sword Heart. It's impossible to say that Xingya doesn't know who saved her. However, she can ignore this question and never ask. Even when she learned about Gu Weixin's death, she didn't say anything. It's really a pure and flawless White Lotus. While Gu Xingyin was absent-minded, all the elders in the hall were arguing over who to accept Gu Xingyin as their disciple. Who wouldn't want to take in a 10th-tier sword heart that was hard to come by in 10,000 years? However, before they could come to a conclusion, a message from the most distant and mysterious mountain of the Star Azura Sword Sect stopped the discussion. The elder ancestor who had been in seclusion for many years and no longer cared about worldly affairs actually came out of seclusion in person and said that he wanted to take Gu Xingyin as his disciple. With that ancestor taking action, the others naturally did not dare to have any objections. The Star Gathering Sword Sect's Star River Sect master personally led Gu Xingyin to the ancestors' Ling Shao Peak. Gu Xingyin was a little surprised. There was no such thing in the original plot. Gu Weixin was finally accepted as a personal disciple by Zhenren Xinghe, and became the first disciple of the Star Luo Sword Sect. If he became the disciple of the ancestor, who had been in seclusion for many years, wouldn't his seniority be much higher than that of the leader? Gu Xingyin secretly hesitated. Thinking of the Devil King in the last world, he couldn't help but have another guess in his heart. Could it be that the legendary ancestor would be his lover? In this way, It makes sense that it's different from the original plot. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but have a little expectation in his heart. Lingxiao Peak was located in one of the most remote places in the star-gathering sword sect. Few people came to disturb it on weekdays. The residence of the ancestor was on the top of the peak. In order to show his respect for the ancestor, Zhenren Xinghe took Gu Xingyin step by step to the top of the peak. Chapter 90. Lingxiao Peak was 1,000 feet tall, and the distance from the foot of the mountain to the top was not short. However, just halfway up the mountain, Gu Xingyin could not hold on any longer. Although her natural aptitude was against the heavens, she was now only an 8-year-old child. Such a journey was too long for her. However, she did not have any slack or complaints. Zhenren Xinghe looked at the little girl with a calm face and followed him to the top of the mountain without saying a word. Even though her forehead was covered with sweat, Gu Weixin never cried out for exhaustion and proposed to rest. Zhenren Xinghe secretly praised her. Her aptitude was against the heavens, and her heart was tenacious. This girl was really a natural seedling for sword cultivation. At this moment, a crane cry came from the distant horizon. Gu Xingyin looked up and saw a beautiful white crane falling from the sky. At the same time, a voice like ice and jade colliding came from the red-crowned crane. "Come up." Gu Xingyin looked at the red-crowned crane with some novelty, but Zhenren Xinghe respectfully saluted the crane. "I will obey the orders of the great ancestor." After that, he held Gu Xingyin in one hand, tapped his toes, and landed lightly on the back of the white crane. The white crane gave a long cry, spread its wings, and flew towards the top of the mountain. The two of them stood at the top of the mountain, and the white crane that had just supported them flashed with white light, turned into a light paper crane, and disappeared. Gu Xingyin. The world of cultivation is really magical. At this moment, Elder Xinghe, who was standing beside Gu Xingyin, suddenly changed his expression and became respectful. After a long while, Elder Xinghe suddenly turned to Gu Xingyin and said, "The great ancestor has been in seclusion for many years and does not want to see strangers. I will not accompany you to see him this time." He told Gu Xingyin where the great ancestor was and left. Gu Xingyin. If it was really the 8-year-old Gu Weixin, at this time, he must be nervous and scared, right? She walked towards the cave abode that Sage Xinghe had pointed out. Without a doubt, she had obtained the approval of the owner of the cave. Those terrifying restrictions set up in the cave did not react to Gu Xingyin at all. Gu Xingyin observed her surroundings as she walked. If Zhenren Xinghe had not personally pointed the way, she would never have imagined that there was someone living in this place. There were no superfluous decorations in the cave, and the walls were bare. As she walked in, she saw a few simple futons on the ground. On the right, there was a large stone room with messy sword marks on the ground. Gu Xingyin only took one look at it, and she immediately felt a stinging pain in her eyes, as if her mind was being pricked by needles. She couldn't help but cry out in pain as cold sweat poured down like rain. "Calm your mind." The cold jade-like voice that was heard from the white crane appeared once again. At the same time, a hand was placed on Gu Xingyin's head. Gu Xingyin only felt that there was a cool air coming into her body from the hand on her head. The stinging pain was smoothed out one by one with this cool air and disappeared. She opened her eyes and looked at the man who looked very tall and straight for her at the moment. She saw the long hair that was like a waterfall. It was snow-white and long to her ankles. Under the long hair, there was a strange young face. Gu Xingyin saw such a person for the first time. He had the face of 20 years old, but the eyes of 100 years old. Of course, his real age was definitely more than this number. This ice and snow man leaned over to Gu Xingyin and said, "Would you like to worship me as a teacher?" Chapter 91. Gu Xingyin thought in a trance. Compared with Gu Weixin, this person is really made of ice and snow, isn't he? She took a step back with a serious face and made a formal salute to the man in white. "Disciple Gu Weixin, pay my respects to Swordsman." The white-robed man's expression softened for a moment, and he nodded at Gu Xingyin. "All right, remember, my name is Lingxiao. You are my first disciple, and you will also be my last. Gu Xingyin lived in Lingxiao Peak from then on. The more time passed, the more she felt that her master Lingxiao was not like a mortal. In addition to teaching Gu Xingyin, he never communicated with outsiders, and did not need to eat. Even this Lingxiao Peak, before Gu Xingyin's arrival, had not allowed outsiders to set foot on it for thousands of years. It's really hard to imagine what kind of life this person has lived. Doesn't he feel bored? Half a year after coming to Lingxiao Peak, Gu Xingyin finally asked this question. Venerable Lingxiao was stunned for a moment. He was a good master. He would try his best to answer his apprentice's questions. Looking at the clear eyes of his little disciple, Venerable Lingxiao frowned, thought for a moment and replied, "Bored? The way of the sword is broad and profound. Even if I spend my whole life, I can't find out 1/10,000th of the way. How can I be bored?" Gu Xingyin was silent. Everyone said that the great-granduncle of Lingxiao Peak was as cold as snow. He was inhuman. He was born to be a cold-hearted person, and a born sword practitioner. Gu Xingyin thought that he was not cold-hearted, but had given all his thoughts and feelings to the way of the sword. If he didn't know that his time was coming and needed to cultivate a new sword master for the Star Sword sect, Gu Xingyin was sure that he would never propose to accept himself as a disciple. Venerable Lingxiao looked at his little apprentice who lowered his head and didn't speak. He thought for a moment, and suddenly had a good idea. Is idealism bored? He thought for a moment. Children of this age were indeed fond of bustling. Ever since he was young, he had always been a loner and didn't like to talk to people. But he had forgotten that his disciple wasn't necessarily the same. Gu Xingyin was stunned by the question. She hadn't interacted with outsiders for the past 6 months. But it wasn't something that was unbearable. Venerable Lingxiao was a very good teacher. He was able to impart his understanding of the sword Tao to his disciple in the simplest way. Gu Xingyin benefited a lot from this. Before Gu Xingyin could react, Venerable Lingxiao made his decision. I didn't think it through. Gu Xingyin. What's going on? Master, what exactly are you thinking? Soon Gu Xingyin knew what Venerable Lingxiao was thinking. Every few days, a child about the same age as Gu Xingyin would be sent to Lingxiao Peak. They all had a common characteristic, and that was that their sword hearts were all above the 7th level. According to Venerable Lingxiao's understanding, those with sword hearts below the 7th level were considered to be very weak. Gu Xingyin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She knew that her master didn't mean to discriminate, but he thought so from the bottom of his heart. However, Venerable Lingxiao found that his method didn't have the corresponding effect. Those children were like proud sons of the heavens on his peak, and had always been served. When they came to Lingxiao Peak, there was nothing to say. There was also a cold and scary great ancestor. None of the children were willing to come a second time, after the first time. After Venerable Lingxiao was distressed for a while, he finally thought of a very suitable person. Chapter 92. When Gu Xingyin received a message from her master, she was practicing her swordsmanship on a flat area on Lingxiao Peak. When she arrived at her master's residence, she saw another man beside her master. This was the first time Gu Xingyin saw someone who could smile so naturally in front of her master. Only idealism, this is your. Venerable Lingxiao seemed to pause for a moment. You can call him senior brother. In the future, your senior brother will accompany you. The man turned around. Gu Xingyin would remember it for a long time. The man had his head lowered, and the fragrance of lotus flowers wafted over his face. His jade-like face was full of gentleness. You're called idealism, right? I'm Xuanke, your senior brother. Gu Xingyin's heart settled down amidst this fragrance. Xuanke? If her memory was correct, this Xuanke was the other sword saint expert of the Stellar Sword sect? Unlike Venerable Lingxiao, Xuanke could be considered young among sword saints. He was not even 1,000 years old. In terms of seniority, Xuanke was the last disciple of Venerable Lingxiao's senior brother. So it was natural for Gu Xingyin to call him senior brother. Let a sword saint expert play with her? Gu Xingyin felt that he was indeed worthy of being her master. In the entire endless sky great world, there were few people who could compare to him. Schwanka looked at the beautiful little girl looking at him with a sparkling face, and his heart could not help but soften a little. In the following days, Schwanka would come to Lingxiao Peak from time to time. Occasionally, he would give Gu Xingyin some pointers, but most of the time, he would bring her some trinkets from the outside world, or tell her some interesting stories about the Stellar Sword Sect. 10 years passed just like that. The only thing that made Gu Xingyin somewhat helpless was that her lover in this life seemed to have always regarded her as a little girl who had not yet grown up. It could be seen that he did not have the slightest bit of romantic feelings for her. However, the future was long. A swordsman, especially a high-level swordsman, had a lifespan of thousands of years. They had enough time to spend together, didn't they? The aptitude of Gu Xingyin's body was indeed astonishing. In just 10 short years, she had gone from an ordinary person who had yet to cultivate to a sword emperor expert. An 18-year-old sword emperor. When Gu Xingyin entered the star-gathering sword sect, most of them were still at the level of swordsmen. A few talented ones had become sword masters. Bai Xingya, on the other hand, was still struggling at the swordsman level. Even Venerable Ling Xiao had once lamented that his disciple's aptitude was the best that he had ever seen in his life. Even he was inferior to Ouyang Ming. You've basically mastered everything I can teach you. With your current realm, you can be considered a powerhouse in the entire Tianlan continent. Your sword Dao will have to depend on yourself in the future. After Venerable Lingxiao said those words to Gu Xingyin, and gave her a long sword that he had personally forged, he began a long period of seclusion. Gu Xingyin knew that her master had reached the end of his lifespan. If he couldn't make a breakthrough in his seclusion this time, master would probably never wake up again. Gu Xingyin asked the system, "Are there any medicinal pills or herbs that can prolong a person's life?" After 10 years of being together, she had truly regarded this man as her master. The system thought for a moment before replying. In this world, there is a kind of heavenly treasure called the Taisui fungus. A 10-year Taisui could prolong one's life by 10 years. A 100-year Taisui could prolong one's life by 100 years. And a 1,000-year Taisui could prolong one's life by 1,000 years. However, in the original plot, there was only 1 century-old Taisui, which was consumed by Bai Xingya. Gu Xingyin made a mental note of it. Chapter 93. Senior brother, be careful. The delicate woman looked ahead with wide eyes. A man wearing the Starnet Sword Sect's intersect uniform was fighting with a wolf-shaped monster. It was obvious that the man was unable to withstand the monster. But even so, he was still struggling bitterly. He shouted to the woman in white standing at the side. "Junior sister Bai, quickly leave." Gu Xingyin's figure was hidden at the side. Seeing this scene, she seriously looked at Bai Xingya, who was standing at the side motionlessly. Well, she was a beauty with average aptitude. She really couldn't figure out what charm she had to make so many men die for her. If it was just Bai Xingya, Gu Xingyin might have thought of letting her die in the mouth of the monster. But that man was a disciple of the Starnet Sword Sect. As a fellow disciple, she couldn't just stand by and watch. Zhao Ximing was an intersect disciple of the Starnet Sword Sect. Today he finally managed to ask his sweetheart out to relax, but he encountered the 4th-level monster, Howling Firmament Wolf. Seeing Bai Xingya's frightened face, Zhao Ximing only felt a sense of heroism in his heart. To be able to shelter a beauty like junior sister Bai from the wind and rain, that was what a real man should do. If Gu Xingyin could hear his thoughts, she would probably regret saving him. Bai Xingya saw that Zhao Ximing seemed to be unable to hold on, and loudly asked her to leave. She thought that she would only be adding to senior brother's troubles if she stayed here. She might as well listen to senior brother and quickly leave to call for help. She was definitely not dragging out an ignoble existence. With that thought in mind, Bai Xingya became more and more confident. She turned and left, not even looking at Zhao Ximing. A dazzling sword light accompanied by ice and snow fell on the Howling Firmament Wolf's body. There was no struggle, no resistance, a one-hit kill. Not even a drop of blood splashed out. Gu Xingyin's sword qi directly froze the Howling Firmament Wolf. Zhao Ximing was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He bowed to Gu Xingyin. Star-gathering sword sect Zhao Ximing thanks Senior for saving my life. He raised his head and glanced at Gu Xingyin. Then he froze. How could there be such a woman in this world? As she stood there, it was as if the air in the entire place had become cold and refreshing. His gaze was too direct. Gu Xingyin glanced at him indifferently. Only then did Zhao Ximing regain his senses with a flushed face. He lowered his head and did not dare to look at Gu Xingyin again. At this time, Bai Xinya, who realized that things had taken a turn for the better, slowly walked up and bowed to Gu Xingyin. Junior Bai Xinya of the Stellar Sword Sect thanks Senior for saving my life. She then looked at Zhao Ximing, her eyes quickly filled with tears. Senior brother Zhao, thank goodness you're all right. Gu Xingyin did not look at her. Instead, she turned to Zhao Ximing and said, friends who can't share trials and tribulations with others in times of danger should keep their eyes open. After saying this, she did not care about the expressions of the two people. She turned into a sword light and disappeared in the blink of an eye. She had said what she needed to say. What Zhao Ximing would do was none of her business. Bai Xinya was secretly angry. Who was this unknown woman in white? Wasn't she trying to drive a wedge between her and senior brother Zhao by saying such words? When she thought of this, her face suddenly became teary. She looked at Zhao Ximing and said, Senior Martial Brother Zhao, I left earlier because I wanted to go to the sect to ask for help. I didn't want to escape alone. Zhao Ximing's expression kept changing. No one knew what he was thinking. Hearing Bai Xinya's words, he suddenly smiled affectionately and said, Of course I believe that junior sister Bai is not such a person. Bai Xinya heard this and relaxed. She gently nestled in Zhao Ximing's arms and said carelessly, I don't know why that senior said such heart-wrenching words. Could it be that I offended her in some way? Zhao Ximing did not say anything. His eyes flashed coldly because of these words. Chapter 94. Gu Xingyin didn't tell anyone about her trip to Lingxiao Peak except for Xinghe. The Starry Sword sect was in the north of the Tianlong continent, so she headed south. It was said that Tai Sui liked dark and humid places, and usually appeared in the south. Finding Tai Sui was only one of her goals. Venerable Ling Xiao gave her a mission for this trip. She had to challenge 100 sword emperors. When Gu Xingyin heard Venerable Ling Xiao's words, she complained to the system in her heart. Look, is this something a female martial artist should do? The system didn't want to answer her. Could you restrain your eager eyes a little when you said this? Recently, a sword emperor had appeared in the Tianlong continent, and he was in the limelight. It was said that she came from the north, and no one knew her identity or her sect. It was said that she was very young, but no witnesses revealed the truth, so no one knew her exact age. What everyone was sure of was that she was a woman, and a very beautiful woman. A lot of people were interested in the topic of women, not to mention a beautiful and powerful woman. This sword emperor, who had never been heard of before, started from the Starry Sword sect in the north, and issued letters of challenge to every famous sword emperor. Sword cultivators liked to fight, and it was a fair challenge, so no one would refuse. One battle after another attracted everyone's attention to this sword emperor. 10 battles, 10 victories. 15 battles, 14 victories. 30 battles, 26 victories. More and more people started to follow her, guessing which famous sword emperor she would challenge next. Where would her sword stop in the end? Gu Xingyin sat in a tavern wearing a cloak, listening to the people at the next table talking. Did you hear? The Icy Heart Sword Emperor is going to challenge the Sword Emperor of the Huanhua Sword sect. The Icy Heart Sword Emperor was the nickname Gu Xingyin that outsiders had given her. TCH, this news has spread everywhere. Who doesn't know about it? Then who do you think will win? I'm guessing it's the Ice Heart Sword Monarch. Didn't you see how many sword monarchs she challenged, and how many times did she lose? Not necessarily. The Clumsy Sword Emperor is one of the most powerful sword emperors in the Huanhua Sword sect. How can those sword emperors compare with him? Open. Let's bet on which sword emperor will win the Battle of 1,000 Peaks. Place your bets. The location of the battle was set at the Battle of 1,000 Peaks, so everyone called it the Battle of 1,000 Peaks. I bet on the clumsy sword emperor. I bet on the ice heart sword monarch. After Gu Xingyin finished the last bite, she got up and walked to the person who opened the bet and took out a storage pouch. 50,000 sword stones. I bet on the ice heart sword monarch. There was a moment of silence. After Gu Xingyin left, the crowd was in an uproar. Rich people indeed. She must be a young miss from some aristocratic family, and an admirer of the ice heart sword emperor. It was interesting. After Gu Xingyin challenged several sword emperors continuously and achieved brilliant results, many swordsmen became her admirers. Every time Gu Xingyin challenged someone, many people would travel thousands of miles to watch the battle. Soon the day of the battle arrived. Gu Xingyin arrived very early. She stood at the top of the 1,000 peaks, feeling the biting cold wind blowing on her body. There were many people in the distance who came to watch the battle of their own accord. The clumsy sword emperor came a little later, and he seemed to attach great importance to the battle. Gu Xingyin slowly took off her cloak. Although he was mentally prepared, the clumsy sword emperor was still surprised by Gu Xingyin's young age when he saw her. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Chapter 95. Gu Xingyin puts away the sword in her hand. Thank you for letting me win. She salutes the sword emperor and turns to leave. Behind her, the sword emperor tries his best to support his body with his hands. Victory and defeat are obvious. Back to the temporary residence, Gu Xingyin can't bear it anymore and spits out a mouthful of blood. The sword emperor deserves to be a famous swordsman. Although she is lucky to win, she is also hurt by the sword energy and suffers internal injuries. It is detected that the host's body has been hurt by level B. It is recommended that the host should not have any fierce fighting in a month. The voice of the system rings in Gu Xingyin's mind. Gu Xingyin smiles. I see, I will have a good rest this month. At this time, a carrier rune in Gu Xingyin's storage ring lights up. Her eyes light up. It's Xuanke. I already know the result of the battle between you and the Sword Emperor. Are you okay? Xuanke is the person who knows Gu Xingyin's realm of Kendo best. He knows that Gu Xingyin's strength is almost the same as that of the Sword Emperor. Even if she wins, I'm afraid it's a narrow victory. Everything is okay. Senior brother, don't worry. Gu Xingyin thinks for a while and replies to him with 8 words. With Gu Weixin's temperament, he will probably only say these words. On the Lingyun peak of the distant star Luo Sword sect, Xuanke looks at his junior sister apprentice's reply and frowns. Alas, my junior sister apprentice is like my uncle. They are all stuffy and won't take the initiative to say anything. It's really hard to be at ease. Otherwise, after a while, go out and see her? Xuanke thinks in his heart. Gu Xingyin holds the sword with one hand, and her left hand holds something with a faint silver light. She is surrounded by a lot of people. Sword Emperor Bing Xen, there are so many of us. You can't escape. I advise you to put down the Tai Sui in your hand. We won't embarrass you. Yes, put down the Tai Sui fungus. And we won't make things difficult for you. The Tai Sui fungus had appeared in the Twilight Swamp in the south, and Gu Xingyin had waited here for half a month before she finally obtained it. How could she possibly give it away? The Tai Sui in his hand was 800 years old. With it, his master would be able to hold on for a while longer. Gu Xingyin's expression warmed as she put it into her storage ring. Seeing Gu Xingyin's actions, everyone immediately knew her plan. Iceheart Sword Emperor. I advise you not to refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. With such an outstanding beauty like you, why do you want to get caught up in all this fighting and killing? A black-robed man stood in the crowd and gazed at Gu Xingyin with infatuation. Surprisingly, he was a sword emperor as well. Gu Xingyin replied to him with a bright sword light. The man didn't expect that she would attack him. After narrowly dodging, he shouted at the people behind him, "Attack her! Be careful, don't kill her. I haven't tasted a beauty in the Sword Emperor realm yet." Bai Xingya leaned against a man in blue and watched Gu Xingyin rush to kill under the siege of a group of people. She stopped talking, which made the man next to her ask, "Xingya, what's wrong?" Bai Xingya seemed to be very hesitant. She bit her lip and said with a forced smile, "Forget it, it's inconvenient." "It's nothing. Although she said so, she kept looking at Gu Xingyin's direction. The man asked curiously, Xingya, do you know the Sword Emperor Bing Xian? Bai Xingya nodded. I've seen that senior. She seems quite disdainful of me. Hearing this, the man in blue immediately felt protective. What? That woman is really like that? Bai Xingya seemed to be very embarrassed and nodded with tears in her eyes. Looking at her, those who didn't know would think that Gu Xingyin had done something to her. Chapter 96. In order to show off in front of the beauty, the man said proudly on the spot, Xingya, don't worry. As the young master of Shitian Pavilion, I'm just a sword emperor without any sect. Let me take revenge for you. After that, he said to the old man who had been standing silently behind him, Uncle Wen, doesn't that sword emperor Bing Xian have a Tai Sui? Go and help me snatch it. I want to give it to Xingya as a gift. Uncle Wen hesitated. Young master, such a young sword emperor might have a powerful master behind her. We'd better not provoke her easily. Hearing this, the man in blue hesitated, but when he turned his head and saw Bai Xingya looking at him with admiration, his blood rushed to his head. If she really has a master, she would have reported it long ago. She must be just an unorthodox sword cultivator. Uncle Wen, you don't have to worry too much. So what if she has a powerful background? Do you think our Shitian Pavilion is afraid of other people? Uncle Wen sighed secretly. Yes, sir. Gu Xingyin was already a little tired. Among the people besieging her, there were at least 3 sword emperors. If she was not careful, there would be another wound on her body. At this moment, a powerful aura locked on her. Gu Xingyin's heart trembled. He looked up and saw a gray-robed elder. My young master wants the Tai Sui fungus in your hands. If it's convenient for you, my Shitian Pavilion can give you a generous compensation. Shitian Pavilion? Gu Xingyin looked over there. As expected, she saw Bai Xingya's figure. The young master of Shitian Pavilion, Shi Lufeng, was the scumbag Gu Xingyin fell in love with in the original plot. After Gu Xingyin came to this world, she had been practicing hard for 10 years. Naturally, she did not fall in love with Shi Lufeng in the original plot. She did not expect to meet him at this time. The pressure on the old man in gray was too strong. He was actually a sword venerable. But it was absolutely impossible for her to hand over the Tai Sui. Gu Xingyin said coldly, The Tai Sui is very useful to me. You'd better give up this idea. When had the gray-robed old man ever been rejected in such a blatant manner? His expression darkened. Since that's the case, this old man will have to put in some effort. The aura of a sword venerable exploded in an instant, and the 3 sword emperors who were besieging Gu Xingyin retreated one after another. Gu Xingyin only felt an aura coming towards him. He couldn't suppress the injuries in his body for a moment, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. She raised the sword in her hand. The system shouted anxiously in Gu Xingyin's mind. The host situation is not optimistic. Please do not force yourself. Gu Xingyin said, I specially found this Tai Sui for master. I don't know when it will appear again. You can't hand it over. Chi. Gu Xingyin only felt a chill as the long sword pierced through his body. She felt a little weak in her body. Using her hand to support her sword, she knelt on the ground. A hint of killing intent flashed in the eyes of the gray-robed old man. Since they had become enemies, such a person couldn't be left in the world. How dare you? An angry voice seemed to come from the sky. The gray-robed old man only felt a flash in front of his eyes, and his body was cold. A snow-white corner of clothes flashed past, and this was the last scene he saw. Schwanke didn't look at the gray-robed old man lying on the ground. He bent down and picked up Gu Xingyin. Senior brother? Gu Xingyin only felt a warm aura surrounding her. The familiar feeling made her feel extremely at ease, and she fell asleep with ease. Chapter 97. When Xian Ke saw his junior sister covered in blood, his heart, which had always been calm, actually started to panic. He was afraid that he was a step too late. Fortunately, he hugged the person in his arms. Fortunately, the situation wasn't too bad. He turned around and his indifferent eyes swept across the dumbfounded crowd. Sword Saint. Someone couldn't help but cry out in a low voice. To be able to kill a sword saint without even drawing his sword. Who else could it be but a sword saint? Xuanke ignored these people and turned to leave with Gu Xingyin in his arms. These people secretly breathed a sigh of relief, especially those who had participated in the siege of Gu Xingyin. They were secretly happy that they had escaped. Who knew that in the next moment, a sword light that seemed to be able to cover the sky would descend? Xuanke's words resounded in everyone's hearts. Those who hurt my junior sister will pay with blood. One after another, blood-curdling screams came from all directions. None of those who had participated in the siege of Gu Xingyin were spared. Bai Xingya couldn't help but shiver. Her gaze drifted in the direction that Xuanke had left. A sword saint. Was he so powerful? If someone could protect her like this. She lowered her eyes, hiding the desire in them. When Gu Xingyin woke up, she felt pain all over her body. System, can I apply to block out the pain? She discussed with the system. The system was unwilling to cooperate. The system has warned the host before to stop dangerous actions. This will lead to extremely serious consequences, even the death of the host's physical body in this world. Since the host didn't listen to the advice, then you must be prepared to suffer. For some reason, Gu Xingyin could hear the concern in the system's words. She begged for mercy. All right, I'll be careful next time. Being careful, not guaranteeing that it wouldn't happen again. Gu Xingyin thought that there were some things that could not be avoided, just because one knew the consequences. After all, the system was just an artificial intelligence. It couldn't understand Gu Xingyin's subtext. Moreover, the host's performance had always been excellent. The naive system was quickly coaxed into forgiving Gu Xingyin. Junior sister, you're awake? Xuanke came in with a tray in his hands. Senior brother. Gu Xingyin looked at him with an inexplicable sense of guilt. Since you're awake, drink the medicine. Xuanke ignored him and got up to leave. Senior brother? Gu Xingyin quickly grabbed his sleeve. Xuanke looked at her with half-closed eyes. Senior brother, are you angry? Gu Xingyin said with certainty. Xuanke looked at his junior sister carefully. He didn't even notice that the little girl who looked like she was carved out of jade had grown so big without him noticing. His junior sister took after martial uncle Ling Xiao. She was usually silent and looked at everyone with a cold expression. Only when she was with him would she occasionally show the little temper of an ordinary girl. But that lively junior sister was now pale. Her lips were red without a trace of blood. When he saw her, she was kneeling on the ground weakly. He didn't know if she was dead or alive. No one knew how flustered he was at that time. Xuanke looked at Gu Xingyin's confused expression, and the nameless anger in his heart suddenly flared up. Why would senior brother be angry? What is senior brother angry about? Angry that you're still holding on despite your injuries? Angry that you're so capable that you can fight 3 sword emperors and a sword venerable alone? Or angry that you've only been out for a few short months, and you've gotten yourself into this state? He pried away Gu Xingyin's hand, that was grabbing onto his sleeve one by one, but was blocked by Gu Xingyin's other hand. I was wrong, senior brother. Gu Xingyin obediently admitted her mistake. She looked at Xuanke eagerly. Her clear eyes were filled with his figure. Looking at Gu Xingyin like this, Xuanke suddenly felt his anger dissipate. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.